In this podcast episode, host Danny Jones interviews former CIA officer John Kiriakou, diving deep into a wide range of topics, including Kiriakou's personal experiences with censorship by Meta, his lawsuit against the tech giant, the complex and volatile situation in the Middle East, particularly the Iran war and Israel's role, American politics, intelligence controversies, the Jeffrey Epstein saga, and the fractured state of U.S. leadership and media. Throughout the conversation, Kiriakou provides candid insights drawn from his extensive intelligence background, exposing various aspects of U.S. foreign policy, espionage, and internal governmental struggles. John begins by describing how a podcast episode with Julian and Dalton elevated his speaking career in the UK and Ireland, leading to a successful tour selling out shows across multiple cities. This success was abruptly derailed when Meta, formerly Facebook, deliberately disabled ticket sales for his London shows by redirecting click-throughs to a blank page, effectively canceling all his events and costing him significant income. A speakers bureau contact with ties to Meta's legal team confirmed Meta's direct involvement, which prompted Kiriakou to sue the company in the Northern District of Texas. His case hinged largely on insider information provided by the bureau contact's ex-wife, who was an assistant general counsel at Meta, and admitted their intent to block him. Despite the potential damages, Kiriakou's legal team took the case on contingency due to Meta's dominant role in their business dealings and the challenges of suing such a powerful corporation. The discussion shifts toward the unprecedented challenges posed by today's information environment, particularly the rise of AI-generated videos and misinformation. John highlights how, unlike past conflicts such as Iraq, Afghanistan, or Libya, modern warfare is accompanied by synthetic videos that confuse truth with fiction. He recalls the example of fabricated AI videos, purportedly of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu during recent hostilities, which were widely circulated to obfuscate his actual status. Both John and Danny stress the difficulty in verifying real events amid the deluge of manipulated content, noting this confusion affects political understanding and public perception worldwide. Turning to American politics, Kiriakou expresses deep disenchantment with the entrenched two-party system, reflecting on historical multi-party democracies and figures like Salmon P. Chase, who changed party affiliation based on principle. The conversation touches on perennial political corruption on both sides, the dysfunction within the Republican Party due to internal civil wars between MAGA and neoconservative factions, and the lack of viable alternatives outside mainstream candidates. Danny and John debate the viability of a third party and grassroots political movements, mentioning libertarian attempts and the challenges faced by prospective candidates like Tucker Carlson and Thomas Massie. They acknowledge some progress in independent political voices, but emphasize the systemic barriers remain formidable. The hosts analyze whistleblower Joe Kent's recent resignation as director of the National Counterterrorism Center, discussing Whitney Webb's controversial theory labeling Kent a CIA top spook engaged in possible deception. John confidently refutes this, explaining Kent was not CIA, was genuinely opposed to the war in Iran, and resigned over ignored intelligence that was biased in favor of Israel. They discuss limitations Kent faced, including being prevented from investigating anomalies tied to the suspicious killing of Charlie Kirk in Utah and the strange FBI involvement in what appeared to be a local matter. John highlights the pattern of government obstruction of whistleblowers and the spectacle of media-driven investigations masking lack of due process. Much of the episode focuses on Iran's situation amid escalating U.S. and Israeli hostility. Kiriakou underscores that America and its allies have no realistic means to win a war to overthrow the Iranian regime, given its vast size, population, and hostile terrain. He contrasts the naive expectations supposedly sold to former U.S. President Trump by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that Iran's government would collapse quickly, to the harsh realities that Iran has deep-rooted nationalistic and religious resistance to invasion. John debunks myths such as popular Iranian support for the exiled royal family, explaining their historical atrocities and unpopularity within Iran. He discusses dangerous rhetoric around oil shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's announcement to impose tolls, and the potential implications of petroleum trade shifting away from U.S. dollars, threatening American economic dominance. John elaborates on Israel's outsized influence on U.S. Middle East policy and critiques Netanyahu's repeated calls for bombing Iran, none of which had presidential backing until recently. He expresses skepticism over the fabricated intelligence often provided by Israeli agencies aimed at garnering U.S. support for conflict. The podcast details instances where Israeli misinformation has shaped American public opinion and policy. John stresses that the alliance benefits Israel's short-term goals of regime change in Iran, even if it provokes lasting negative consequences for the U.S. and the region. The conversation covers Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states' fears of Iran, fluctuating diplomatic efforts, and regional proxy conflicts. The interview touches on Israel's contentious domestic and international image. John describes how Israel has reinstated the death penalty exclusively for Palestinians, with far-right politicians like Ben Gvir rising to powerful posts despite their violent and racist pasts. The hosts discuss Israel's increasingly intolerant society, including violent incidents against non-Jews in Jerusalem. John questions how Israel, while exerting enormous control over U.S. government policy, struggles with effective international public relations and faces growing opposition both domestically and globally. Discussion also revolves around emerging political figures like Florida candidate Anthony Fishback and his controversial positions, suggesting a generational shift in how U.S. politicians approach foreign policy, immigration, and social issues. John references Glenn Greenwald's view on Tucker Carlson's potential presidential ambitions and debates the tension between maintaining a critical media voice versus seeking political office. They note how campaign finance and party machinery often grind up and discard promising outsiders before they gain significant traction. A significant portion of the episode centers on the Epstein scandal and its far-reaching implications. John and Danny analyze how decades of abuse and illicit networks appear intertwined with powerful elites, including the Rothschilds and Les Wexner. They explore the failures of prosecution, the mysterious circumstances around Epstein's death, and the strategic withholding of millions of documents under questionable legal pretenses. Kiriakou shares insights into Epstein's high society contacts, including those in intelligence circles, and how the scandal exposes systemic corruption and blackmail potential among prominent political figures. The episode also critiques the selective and often superficial investigations into related crimes, including the opaque nature of the government's kill lists and extrajudicial killings during the Obama administration. Interspersed are personal anecdotes from John's CIA career, including his time in Pakistan, interactions with legendary operatives like Felix Rodriguez and the late Billy Waugh, and reflections on intelligence shortcomings. He discusses how intelligence is gathered, the challenges in penetrating countries like Iran, and the routine receipt of false or exaggerated reports, especially from allied intelligence services such as Israel. The conversation touches on the false flag concept, noting how intelligence operations can involve elaborate deception, with examples like Mossad's recruitment tactics. John provides a detailed explanation of the U.S. intelligence community's unanimous national intelligence estimates that Iran does not currently possess a nuclear weapons program, despite ongoing uranium enrichment for civilian uses. He explains the geopolitical motivations behind persistent Israeli narratives exaggerating Iran's nuclear ambitions, and highlights disinformation campaigns surrounding alleged Iranian sleeper cells and attack plots within the U.S. The discussion touches on strategic considerations about maintaining and monitoring these threats, including Iran's missile tests and limited attacks on American military bases. The podcast delves into the troubling mingling of religious fervor and politics, especially the evangelicals' portrayal of Donald Trump as divinely anointed. John warns of the dangerous consequences when religious zealotry influences senior military and political leaders, and emphasizes the risks of conflating political identity with religious belief. They recount incidents of military personnel reportedly indoctrinated with apocalyptic visions and critique legal and social policies that selectively emphasize security concerns based on flawed stereotypes of Muslims and Sharia law. John outlines how the American economy is deeply intertwined with military spending, noting that Pentagon contracts support jobs in every congressional district. This militarized economic structure creates significant political incentives for sustained conflict and high defense budgets. He links this entrenched system to the wider global arms trade controlled by elite groups, highlighting the blurred boundaries between corporate, political, and intelligence interests in perpetuating war and maintaining geoeconomic dominance. Throughout the episode, John and Danny reflect on the pervasive corruption within U.S. politics, from corporate influence on Congress to corrupt pardons issued by Donald Trump. They discuss the use of media and social platforms for propaganda, disinformation, and political posturing. They also lament the decline of objective journalism, replaced by partisan narratives, and note growing public distrust that fuels conspiracy theories and political polarization. John draws parallels between the current political environment and previous turbulent periods, such as 1968, emphasizing ongoing cycles of political unrest, misinformation, and covert operations. He recalls historical events like the Bay of Pigs invasion and Kennedy assassination, referencing the complex roles of agencies and operatives now publicly acknowledged to have influenced major historical outcomes. He highlights how covert actions and deception remain deeply embedded in U.S. foreign policy and internal governance to this day. The hosts touch upon the potential for revolutionary change in the U.S., expressing skepticism about current political parties' ability to address the country's crisis. They consider the possibility of people's frustration reaching a breaking point, resulting in movements based not on traditional left-right divides, but on demands for genuine accountability and governance beyond entrenched elites. Danny and John share a cautious hope that grassroots political awakening and independent voices could reshape the future despite systemic resistance. The conversation addresses the evolving landscape of social media platforms like X, formerly Twitter, highlighting how algorithmic incentives encourage sensationalism and divisiveness. They note how users, even celebrities, can receive payment or promotion merely based on engagement, which distorts public discourse. John recounts his own experiences with online harassment and misinformation campaigns and reflects on the precarious state of free speech in an increasingly surveilled and manipulated digital world.